So excited to be kicking off our first webinar Wednesday. For those of you who may not know, we are moving our webinars from the last Friday of the month to the last Wednesday of the month. Hopefully, this can accommodate more folks. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to give everyone just a couple of seconds, maybe about a minute to settle in, also to let our folks from the waiting room come in before I start to introduce our speaker for today. All right, I think we've got everyone in. All right, so I'll go ahead and start by introducing Adina Appelbaum. She is the co-founder and CEO of International Empowerment and Immigrant Finance. She is a practicing immigration attorney, accredited financial counselor, and financial empowerment strategist, podcast host, speaker, and business growth consultant. She co-founded Immigrant Finance with her husband Mauricio in 2018 after he immigrated to the US from Ecuador in 2013, and they struggled with finances for several years, not being able to find any resources focused on helping immigrants navigate the financial system. Through their signature program, Immigrant Finance School, they have helped over 400 immigrants and their families learn how to manage money, invest, master US financial systems, but buy property and start businesses, including without a social security number, to pave the way for future security and generational wealth. Adina is passionate about helping financial professionals and institutions confidently and knowledgeably serve more I-10 holders and immigrant clients. In her immigrant finance certification program, she trains financial professionals on mastering immigrant finances. Her vision is for every U.S. financial institution to have a certified immigrant finance professional on staff so that no immigrants are told incorrect financial information. So, with that, I feel so lucky to have Adina Appelbaum here with us today. Great source of knowledge here. Before I turn it over to her, we highly encourage you to drop your questions in the chat. Adina will address those as they come, and we will also have a Q&A session at the end if you have any questions then. All right, I'll turn it over. Thank you, Adina.
Thank you so much, Nivy. It's great to be here. I'm really honored to be in this space with you all, especially in these really difficult times. I hope everyone is hanging in there. And just thank you for taking the time to learn more about immigration updates going on and how it applies to your work. So my understanding is a lot of you work in credit unions and are working with members who might be immigrants. So I would love to just get a sense before we dig in from the room, like if you do tend to somewhat regularly work with immigrants in your work on immigrant members, if you could just put like a 1 in the chat, that would be give me a good sense of the group. And if anyone wants to share kind of like how frequently, I'd love to hear that too. Yeah, I see a lot of ones coming. I figured, okay. And then next up, if you tend to work with a lot of folks who are I-10 holders, you can put a 2 in the chat. That'd be good to know as well. Lots of twos coming in. Okay, amazing. You guys are my people. This is great. We work with a lot of I-10 holders in immigrant finance. And that's right. My immigration law background has been very handy to help guide people through the financial system, how it maps onto the immigration system. So the goal for today, I'll introduce myself and then we'll do an agenda. So yeah, thank you so much again for the intro already. But here you can just see a picture of me and my husband, Mao. He goes by Mao for short. He's currently watching our kids right now. But yeah, we're a small business, family owned, and we primarily work with individual immigrants and their families to get them started with investing and wealth building, financial planning. And we also, as Naibi mentioned, train other financial professionals through a certification program how to do this work. So for today, I have 3 goals. My first is to just clarify for everyone, in case anyone is not quite sure, like the fact that immigrants can do everything in the financial system with an ITIN. And then bulk of today will be going over some immigration, legal and policy updates. I wish there was something I could do to make this part less horrible and depressing. So just a heads up, I mean, you all know from what's going on with the people you work with, and I'm sure how many people's families have been impacted in the news. It's awful. But I will try to sum up what is maybe relevant for your work in credit unions. And then lastly, we'll talk about some things that you can do to help. Just the disclaimer that lawyers always have to give no individual legal advice or attorney-client relationship. This is just legal education that I'm providing today. And yeah, I am totally fine with questions coming in as we go in the chat if you have anything you want to ask, and I'll try to answer. And if not, toward the end, we'll leave some space as well. I think we have until 2 o'clock Eastern, right? Great. Okay. So first, what is possible for immigrants financially? It really does come down to having that ITIN, which stands for Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, if someone does not have a Social Security number. If they do have that ITIN, there's nothing folks can't do. I'll list the stuff on the next slide. I do see the main issue being either folks don't have an ITIN already, so they need to prioritize that. Um, and or their ITIN might be expired and they haven't realized it. The rule of thumb to screen if someone's ITIN might be expired is ask them when they last paid taxes, because it's about every, I think it's 3 years. If someone hasn't filed a tax return, the ITIN would expire. I'm not quoting exactly the rule with the numbers of days and months and stuff, but it's close to that amount. So that's a way to start to screen.
Could you grab me a band-aid?
And so, yeah, just to clarify, folks can open bank accounts, even high yield savings accounts to start getting good interest. Not every single bank is going to accept an ITIN, but many, reputable national banks and same with credit cards, and building credit. I often actually recommend to our students in our immigrant finance school program who have no credit to start with credit unions, because I hear you all tend to be more friendly than traditional financial institutions and supportive of immigrants. That's my what I've heard from many people in the financial space, but this is actually my first time really getting to interact with credit union folks. I'm so grateful to be in touch with you all now, and would love to connect and hear about, also what you guys are seeing in your work. So the best way we have found with our students, at least with building credit, is through a secured credit card, which is kind of like a starter credit card for folks who don't have credit. I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir or slash people who know a lot more about credit than I do, but we've seen that work really well for folks to get started. And then, yes, immigrants can invest as long as they have that ITIN number, if they don't have a social security number. This is the main thing that we help people with, because almost everyone that comes to us has been told they can't invest, and that's incorrect. It's just logistically more difficult, as folks know, with all the barriers that ITIN holders can face. But there are three reputable investment firms we recommend for ITIN holders: Vanguard, Fidelity, and Charles Schwab. All will open accounts for ITIN holders. We have had the most success with Vanguard in particular. We've had 100% success rate with them over the years. But it often is logistically challenging. We often have to get on a three-way call with folks and get them through all those immigration questions. But a lot of people have success with Fidelity as well. Immigrants can absolutely own property, buy houses. The challenge that comes in is finding a mortgage lender that will accept an ITIN, but there are many that do. And I'd love to hear too if credit unions offer mortgage loans. I don't know that actually. If anyone has thoughts on that, share in the chat. And then also starting and owning businesses is absolutely possible. That is all at the state level. For example, if someone's like registering an LLC. Oh, great. Yay. This is so good to see in the chat. People do offer mortgage loans. That's so great to hear. Would love to hear the name of your credit union in the chat so I can try to grab that and make sure we add it to our resources. Great. And yeah, for a business, so like if someone's registering an LLC, for example, that's at the state level. I did a research project with the name is escaping me now. Oh my gosh, I have to pull it up. The Dream.us. and I was able to confirm that every single state in the US and DC will does not require a social security number to register an LLC, which is great. The issue where it comes in is at the state level for taxes. There are a handful of states that will require a social security number if someone's business is considered a sole proprietorship, which is essentially a business that has not been registered. Right. If which it's not required of an LLC or register a business. If you're just like operating and selling goods for money, products or services, you're automatically a sole proprietor. And so those folks still have to pay state and federal business taxes, and that's the challenge is sometimes the sole proprietor needs to have a social in some states, but if that can be overcome with registering an LLC and then using the LLC identification number instead, which is obtained at the federal level. That's called an EIN number. So yeah, all of these things are possible. So please help us with getting the word out that immigrants can do all of these things. Um, the main area where I've seen most limited for ITIN holders in the financial system is getting business loans. That has been very challenging for us to figure out. So please also share in the chat if you offer business loans to ITIN holders. That'd be really helpful to know, or if you know of resources that do. And just, yeah, again, get the word out, folks. Oh, great. Oh my gosh, Seattle Credit Union. That's great. Okay. Um, Kendra, yeah, I will grab the link at the end when I'm not screen sharing, but it's on our website under the resources, the dream.us tab. There's actually one research report on the LLC stuff I mentioned. There's another one on professional licensing at the state level. That is very complicated and depends on the state and the profession. It's a mess. Like some professions in some states, they do require social to get licensed in certain areas, but not other areas and all of that. Okay. So let's go into immigration legal policy updates. But did anyone have questions on what I just shared on what immigrants can do, aka everything in the financial system? Okay, hopefully that is clear. If that was new for anyone to learn that, I would love to know that too and get a sense if like that's out there in the credit union space. If you learned something new from that, let me know too in the chat, please. Okay, on to the depressing part. I'm sorry in advance. There is so much that's happened in 2025 and already in 2026. It feels impossible to get all on a couple slides, but I tried to boil down like the most pertinent that might be relevant. So overall, we're seeing, as you all know, a major increase in racial profiling, immigration arrests, and detention. I will share actually in my immigration law work, I've been doing deportation defense for adults and children detained by ICE and by the government for over 10 years. And I'm involved in a lot of the lawsuits suing against a lot of this, so tracking it very closely. Um, and yeah, just like as an example, for example, the lawsuit around ICE arrests in DC, right? We got an injunction from the court, right? But like they're just violating stuff. They're not doing what they're supposed to, and detention is only going up. We have the most people ever currently in detention. There's about 75,000 people on any given day currently in detention, and they are very scarily ramping that up with warehouses they're starting to build across the country. Um, they, I think folks should know this, although it's really upsetting to hear, they even have like mentioned in an article that they want it to be like Amazon warehouses for deportation. So they're trying to do this even faster with even more systems and technology. And last summer, the horrible law that was passed, HR 1, also called the One Big Beautiful Bill or whatever, I hate saying that, gave ICE so much money, billions and billions of dollars of money. And that's currently up right now. You might have heard a lot of advocacy telling people to call their senators and say, don't give ICE more money because that's being decided by the 30th. this week if they're going to give them more. And there's finally some resistance from Democrats to not give ICE one more penny, but they already have this huge slush fund from that law last summer. And the conditions are really bad in these detention centers as well. Um, we all know about the attack on birthright citizenship that's been going through the courts. There's multiple lawsuits on that, and waiting for the Supreme Court's decision on this. Something else that happened, which was like always something immigration lawyers feared because it was already allowed in the law, was to expand something called expedited removal. Expedited removal is essentially being able to like deport people who've been here less than 2 years without going through immigration court, without due process. And again, the law already allowed this, but it was always done more just at the border. And this administration has expanded that really nationwide. So that's why you hear a lot of people saying, like, carry your papers, carry your documents, so you can try to show you've been here more than 2 years and like demand to see an immigration judge and be able to fight a case. Yeah, I'm sorry for the trigger warning. And I totally understand if anyone wants to like go off video or go away for this part of the presentation. I'm so sorry. It's so awful. There's also been the attempts to terminate forms of lawful status that are a bit more temporary in nature. The main ones have been TPS, which is temporary protected status. That's something that's different administrations have given for people from certain countries when there's been like a civil war or an environmental disaster, and people get work permits through that. So they are here lawfully, but it is temporary in nature. And the administration has ended TPS for a lot of countries, including Venezuela. And then parole is something they've also been limiting as well. The Biden administration had set up a program to parole in people from certain countries like Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and that has also been ended. There's litigation on all of this happening. Most relevant for you all on your work is the attempts for information sharing between the IRS and ICE. This has been really, really scary, I think, for all of us. But there is some good news, at least temporarily right now. There is an injunction in place right now from the DC District Court that stopped it. So we are finally in a good place on this. And there's two lawsuits going on it. The other lawsuit, the first one did not get an injunction, by the way, is like a temporary ruling from the court to like stop something preliminarily while the rest of the case goes on because cases take a long time to litigate. So the first case lost because it lost the injunction because there wasn't like evidence they had really done it. And that case is up on appeal at the DC Court of Appeals. And in the hearing for the appeal, you could hear all of the appellate judges basically being like, what the hell? Like, this is the government's source of revenue, right? And this doesn't make any sense. And you're scaring people from paying their taxes. Like, so it was positive to hear the judges' reaction because the Court of Appeals are very difficult. And then that second lawsuit was brought once there was evidence that a data sharing incident had happened, and the lower court, the district court judge did issue the injunction stopping it. So we know that there was this MOU to try to share information. What was going on in this case is the government was basically lying and saying like, oh no, we're only sharing information as the law allows, which is like basically if there's a criminal investigation, then they can share information with the IRS and DHS. But the way they were interpreting that was illegal because they were saying like millions of people were in that category, and the judge was like, there's no way it's that many people, and you have like one ICE official that's supposed to do an individual analysis of all these people. Like that's not possible, right? So yeah, I've been tracking this for a while. Apparently, I saw some reporting. There's like from the data, the one data incident we're aware of that was shared. Apparently, it's like sitting in a file on a computer and has not been used. And the injunction is in place. So I'll have to keep watching that closely. I think that for like what to practically break this down for people you're helping, is the way I'm interpreting it is like if you don't have an ITIN already, you should be informed about the risks of doing that because by filing for an ITIN, you're sharing your address, your name, your information. That is providing that exposure in this situation that is very fluid and very vulnerable. For people who already do have an ITIN, like that risk has been taken on. So I personally do not see any additional risk that someone would have from using their ITIN for wealth building purposes, like opening a high yield savings account or opening an investment account or getting a mortgage. Like they already have the ITIN, right? Um, what folks can do, and this is very difficult to advise on, is just like be aware of what address was provided when they applied for their ITIN and when they filed their tax returns. And we can't really say a lot more to people what to do about that, but people can make their own conclusions with that information, knowing their rights and what address has been shared, if you know what I mean. Any questions on this piece before we continue to the next list? And yes, Eduardo, I hear you. I feel like every day I'm like, it's just a nightmare that's gonna end soon. Okay. And then, in terms of like filing tax returns, I think the same thing applies. Like if your information's already been shared, it's already been shared. It's not additional risk, although be mindful of what address. I did speak to an accountant friend of mine who was like, she put it this way, people all the time share addresses that might not be where they actually live for tax returns for various reasons. Like someone, she has clients in upstate New York that they get snowed in a lot, or like they, their address, the mail gets lost in the apartment building or whatever, or they have a few different properties. So just something good to refer people to talk to an accountant about. Does it seem harder for someone to get an I-10? I have not heard anything about that. Has anyone else? What tips do you have for bringing awareness of what people should and shouldn't do? I think that with I-10 and tax filing, I really think it is if you don't have an I-10 yet, speak to an immigration lawyer first before applying for one to kind of assess the risks there and letting them know like the government has tried to get that information and there's a court stopping it right now, and that is the current status. So I think just like informing people, it's so people can make decisions based off that. And then in terms of not bringing more fear into the community, yeah, I think like it's just like helping people separate out because where I see it come in is like I'm afraid to start investing because of this. And so helping people see like that act alone is not adding more risk if you already have the ITIN, right? And we don't want people to stop empowering themselves because of this going on, right? They should continue to be able to grow their money and wealth build. Um, Someone asked if anyone has experienced ICE at their branch locations. I would like to hear that as well, if anyone has. For renewing the ITIN, so they would be doing that if they're filing a tax return and their ITIN has expired. It's just adding a one-page form, W-9, I believe it's called. So that alone like wouldn't add more risk than filing a tax return would, right? I think like the key thing is the address that is being shared, basically. And so people can make their decisions about that. Um, Someone asked, did you say the IRS is currently not sharing ITIN information? There is a court injunction not allowing them to right now in place, finally. For a while there was not, which was really scary. Yeah. And there's at least one incident we know of info that was shared, but apparently hasn't been used. Um, okay. All right, I'm gonna go on to the next slide. We can talk more about in the Q&A. Some more, this is the last slide. Okay, more horrible things. And then we'll go on to what you can do. So like a big theme of this administration has been pressuring people to self-deport. They know, even with all this money they have, they know they don't have the resources to actually deport everyone who is legally deportable. right? There's like over 12 million undocumented people in the United States, estimates say. So that's why they're doing this psychological warfare, in my opinion, and doing all these really like horrifically violent and graphic things because they know fear is the way to accomplish their goal. And so one way they're doing that is like you might have heard people ICE saying if you'll get $1,000 stipend if you go back to your country. We're not aware of anyone who's ever actually gotten that. Okay, it's a lie. It's and then when people are detained and in removal proceedings, they're making the conditions so bad that so that people give up and take something called voluntary departure, which is basically agreeing to deportation that has some legal benefit because then you don't have a bar if you try to come back legally later, like for example, through family. And so a lot of people are taking voluntary departure instead of fighting their cases because the conditions are so bad. I have later on here the third country deportations, like if folks heard about Kilmar's case and how they've been trying to like send people to random countries in Africa and stuff. This is another way they're just trying to make it so bad for folks, right? Um, the high immigration fee increases, there's now these really high fees to fight any case, which makes it financially really difficult for people as well. So we have always taught in our like approach to saving and budgeting, like it's important to have a separate fund for immigration costs, right? So you can hire an immigration attorney, pay immigration fees. Now the need is just greater because of these fees. And for immigration attorneys, by the way, it is so important because, first of all, there's no public defender in immigration court. Immigration court is the same thing as removal proceedings. It's like the court some people get to go to fight for their rights if they're being deported, but not everyone gets to go to immigration court. Having an immigration attorney makes someone 10 times more likely to win their case, studies show. And so it is incredibly important and it's also incredibly expensive. So this is a huge part of financial planning for immigrants. And you can really help someone by encouraging them to save for an immigration attorney if they need it. I don't know the rates myself because the immigration law work I do is nonprofit, but we're talking thousands of dollars for simple cases even. So, and especially with how complicated it is to fight now and how fast attorneys have to fight, the prices are going up and the need. Massively expanded funding for ICE, I mentioned that. Let me just see the questions really quick. Um, oh my gosh, so sorry to hear, Darla, you all experienced one. I'm so sorry. That's awful. Um, Victor asked if there's immigration attorneys that do a reduced fee or free. This was another update I was debating whether to put is that the government attempted to cut federal funding for all the legal service providers nationwide. I'm on like all those lawsuits fighting that, and we have gotten injunctions on a lot of them, but again, it's very vulnerable. That could change. So what that means is most of the nonprofits have lost all their funding, federal funding, which is like the largest source of money, right? Foundations cannot make up for it. And so the resources, like not only are there so many more people, the demand is higher, but also the funding is down. So it's really hard to get a free attorney. It always was. It's even harder now. And then reduced fees. There's not that many groups that do it. One group that has offices around the country is called Clinic, Catholic Legal Immigration Network or something. They do low bono. And then in terms of private attorneys that do low bono, it kind of just depends on your area and if someone's ability and capacity and what connections you have. They have also paused all affirmative asylum applications. This was after the shooting of the National Guard member in DC several months ago. That was the administration's response. And so that means that people can't like affirmatively say, I have an asylum claim, I want to apply for asylum. the only way really is if someone is detained and being deported, or somehow they got out of detention, but they're in deportation proceedings, they can defensively apply for asylum. And we're seeing that also get very limited because they are firing all of the judges that grant cases, essentially. They've literally relabeled immigration judges to, they're now called, I'm not kidding, deportation judges. So the whole system has become like it always was a sham, but it really is very clear now. And so you've probably heard maybe in the news a little bit, or, people talking about habeas. This is now like the most important type of case. My team and my legal work is doing habeas all day, every day. It's a type of case where you get to get out of the immigration court system, which is through the administration, through the Department of Justice, and you get to go to an independent federal court and say this person is being illegally detained, um, give them a bond hearing or release them. And those have been very successful. Thankfully, we're seeing the district courts grant these a lot and faster and faster. I just had the first one granted in 3 business days, the fastest one we've had. They used to take like months to litigate these kinds of cases. So that is one good thing happening. But very few attorneys are trained in how to do habeas. So that's something in the DMV area. We're working on scaling up training and getting more pro bono attorneys to do those types of cases. And let's see, what else did we miss? The last point here, just on the bond thing. So for as they're increasing detention, of course, because they're assholes, excuse my language, issued a bullshit decision that is just completely made up, saying that basically the vast majority of people in detention are now not eligible for release on bond. And the category they're referring to is people who've crossed the border. With it's called entered without inspection. They're now saying statutorily they're not eligible for bond, and so that's why you're hearing everyone go to habeas to just federal court, and why we've seen almost every single district court judge say that's wrong, that's illegal, give them a bond hearing. There's only been a couple judges in a couple courts that have had the fringe decision of agreeing with the government. But I do think this is going to go up to the Supreme Court, so we'll have to see what's going on. Um, thank you, Anna. Thanks for receiving the realness. I'm sorry. It's just really, as you all know, it's so awful. And this is just context for you guys to know what's going on. There's so much happening. There's so much more that has happened than what I've mentioned. But hopefully this kind of like organizes a little bit, just like everything that's happened the past year and how it's kind of fitting together. Yeah. Let's go on to what you can do next. But any questions before we move on? Just checking the chat. Can you talk more about the purpose and impact of injunctions and lawsuits? I'm trying to reconcile these processes with the reality that our administration acts as though they aren't obligated to follow established rules unless they wrote them. Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's kind of like this major test to democracy. I mean, this is, I think, been the scariest part for a lot of lawyers is like seeing that sometimes they're not following the court orders. But we are starting to see the federal courts really try to hold them accountable and like start to, there was in Minneapolis, the Republican judge just ordered one of the ICE directors to come personally into court so that he can decide whether to hold him in contempt. And we're seeing, I actually had a case where the judge in her decision threatened contempt and sanctions against the government attorney for lying. So we're seeing the courts step up some. Obviously needs to be a lot more in terms of like the purpose. I mean, this is like the main tool we have. Like Congress isn't acting enough. And so the third branch is the courts, right? And they are they're they're not okay. They're following them still somewhat. Like it's still worth doing. We're not at a point where they're not following any court orders. But it is touch and go, right? And so there's a lot of litigation around enforcing the court orders. That's called a motion to enforce. Um, so like I mentioned, the DC ICE arrest lawsuit I'm on, who got the injunction. We now have evidence they're not, like, when you look into the details, not really fully following it. So like in that scenario, a motion to enforce is needed, right? And I think, I'll share something one of my colleagues said to me that kind of made sense in the beginning of all of this when I was like, are the courts just gonna fall? When we first started hearing about them not fully following orders. And this colleague is a political economist, and he was like, they're they're too obsessed with profit and their economic benefit to allow the court system to completely fall, because they need that to have like some regularity for their businesses, right? If you have a country with no law at all. So I think that's why they are still complying sometimes, right? And I do have cases where they're complying, like I mentioned the lawsuits about funding legal services for nationwide. One of our cases on children's legal services, nationwide for unaccompanied minors, they tried to terminate that. There's an injunction in place. Um, they they're following it. The money is flowing. They're trying to do shady stuff, right? And we have to be really on them and keep filing stuff, but the funding is currently flowing still. It has been for several months. So it's kind of just like everything is harder. Does that answer your question? Sorry. Elizabeth asked, how can credit unions defend their staff and members if they get harassed by people visiting the branches? Um, did anybody see the video of ICE in Minneapolis trying to go into the Ecuadorian embassy yesterday? Look it up if you haven't. Like, that was kind of a good visual thing. Like, the head of the embassy went to the door and was like, "You can't come in, get out. This is a, foreign embassy. I mean, you all aren't able to say that, but like the main thing is don't open the door. That's the most significant thing you can do legally is do not open the door. As soon as you open the door, I'm talking about in private spaces in particular. So let me step back. So sorry, let me step back. Little know your rights in the business setting. In public places, so where like members, customers can go in and out, there is less protection there because it's a public place. So in like a restaurant too, right? But in areas considered private areas like employee break rooms, offices, things like that, um, they have no right to go in there without permission because of the Fourth Amendment. So you can do things like, first of all, don't open the door in those areas, don't give them permission, put a sign on the door that says private, lock the door. Have everyone on your team be on the same page and know that that is the policy, have a written plan about that, right? And I can send resources for anyone who needs support on that. And there's a lot of like guides and stuff. So that's what you can do. And that's a good segue into what you can do in addition to what I just started saying. Because I mentioned that most people don't have a lawyer, especially when they're detained, and they are 10 times more likely to win if they have one. This is the number one thing you can do to help people with is refer them to immigration attorneys. So figure out in your area what are the trusted legal service providers that are working with detained immigrants and helping them, and who are the private immigration attorneys in your area who have good reputations. That's very locally based. Um, and just like ask around, and the nonprofits might be able to also tell you who the good immigration attorneys are. Have those names ready to call and share them with your people. Offer know your rights trainings and resources, both for your staff and for members, community. You can host them at the credit union. Um, Nonprofits might be able to help in your area do it, but to be honest, a lot of them are really under capacity. So I would recommend that's something to invest in hiring, maybe like a private attorney to do one of those. And then there are these really great small, look like a business card that's red from the ILRC that summarizes people's rights. They have them in multiple languages, and you can order some at redcards.com that would be a good thing to just have, you know, right when people walk in to grab. And then stay connected to local immigrant defense networks. We're seeing like, you know, Minneapolis is really the model, but they have this really deeply connected organizing, you know, community situation where everybody is like connected and sharing information. And most areas now are starting to have that. And so kind of plugging in with local immigration advocates to ask, how can I get connected? You know, a lot of them are on Signal chats. And then people are sharing updates, and that's a lot of the way that communities are fighting back in Minneapolis is like neighbors and community members are sharing information about where ICE is and, you know, trying to stay one step ahead to inform communities. And I think that was everything I wanted to cover. So yeah, well, we have some time for Q&A. Just want to thank you all so much for being here. One other way, if you're looking to like go deeper in this work, particularly on the financial side, that we can offer is, I mentioned we have a certification program where we teach people everything we know about immigrant finances, how to guide immigrants in the financial system in a way that is not going to cause more risk, keeping immigration laws and systems in mind. And we are having our next cohort in March. So if anyone's interested in that, you can send me a message. All my info is on here. And I will open it up for questions. Let me check the chat. Hope everyone is hanging in there after that rundown. Oh, thanks for Gabby for sharing the link for the red cards. Yeah. Yeah, I think Darla, I think like just sharing support is really important. It doesn't feel as satisfying as like a tangible thing, but just for people to know they're not alone and that like, you know, more and more people thankfully are coming out in support of immigrants and against ICE right now, which is a silver lining. Oh, Kendra, that's interesting to hear what you said about ICE coming to the lobby. So were you able to get them to leave? Can you add in case that would help others? Yeah, it sounds awful. Feel free to come off mute if anyone has questions too, or you can put in the chat. That's great. You're sharing whistles and packets with legal advice. Yeah, and like this stuff about like don't open the door, demand. I didn't talk about the warrant. I'll speak about that too, but demanding the warrant, we're seeing like that more and more people are aware of this, which is really great. That's how there was a lot of resistance in Chicago as well. The Chicago community did a really good job informing people of their rights. And so they were not able to do as much damage as they wanted there. For the warrant piece, to enter a home or like the private spaces of a business, they need to have a warrant. I actually have a slide what it looks like. Let me see. Hold on. Okay, they need to have a judicial warrant. So ICE is tricky and they will say they have a warrant, but it is often an ICE warrant, which is what it looks like on the right. It's an administrative warrant. That is not sufficient. They need to have actually a judicial warrant. This is which is on the left. This is how you know it's judicial warrant. It would say district court. It has to have the address of the place they're trying to get into listed, not just like a blank one. Um, the date, right? It has to be specific about what they're searching for. It has to be signed by a federal judge, right? And it's extremely rare for them to have this. So that's why you hear a lot of people say like ask if you have a warrant because usually they don't. And if you only have to open the door if they actually have one of these warrants here. Um, and again, like the reason it's so important to not open that door is because as soon as you crack it open, all of these Fourth Amendment protections start to go away because it's kind of like giving permission. So that's why you'll hear people say, slide the warrant under the door or put it up in the window, right? I need to see the warrant. Um, Now, very scarily, there was an article that came out recently about a leaked memo with ICE apparently thinking now that they don't need a warrant to enter homes, which is like against the most basic of constitutional law. Like, it's really disturbing. So I know there is litigation being looked into around that, but just be on the lookout that that's a very scary development too, that they now think they don't need them. Here's example of like legal signs you can have for those private spaces. I definitely recommend putting something like this up for any employee break rooms and like having a plan that staff know to go to those rooms. This is another version, kind of what I just went over. Okay. Here's some examples of signs. I think these actually were shared in Chicago. I had someone that shared these with me when people really did a good job getting the word out about all this. So it's basically just like you need a warrant. And then I had gotten a question for another presentation of like, what can we say that's allowed that's saying we like support immigrants? So some examples here and know your rights information. Yeah. A little bit more what you can do is, yeah, designate like a response team for like who's going to be the ones to respond if ICE shows up, right? And then like also if they do show up, especially assuming they're not following the law and stuff, like document everything because that will be helpful in a lawsuit after that. If you do get an I-9 audit, which is like ICE trying to investigate if anyone's been employed without a work permit, know that the organization does have 3 business days to provide the documents. So take those 3 days, talk to an immigration lawyer, um, get representation for that. Don't just hand over stuff. Okay. Let me end the screen share. We have a little bit more time if anyone wants to just like share how they're feeling or something they've seen that might help other credit unions. Please feel free to use this space or any other questions.
Have a question.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how someone that has an I-10 already, what their pathway would be to getting employment status? Um, because I think we're having a situation where we're no longer offering I-10 lending because of not being able to use W-2s. So I
Mhm.
think it's the the concern that a lot of employees are having is not understanding the difference between like employment and like what an ITIN holder has like rights legally versus someone that has social. So can you talk through
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Yes. I wish I had a better answer for you. And sorry, I'm putting the guides I mentioned as well in the chat too. Um, I wish I had a better answer. It's if someone has an ITIN, it's usually because they're not eligible for a work permit because they don't have a social security number. And the more vast majority of people have no pathway to getting status because of how horrible the laws are. Um, so you hear people say, "Oh, folks just need to do it the legal way, need to get in line, right?" But for most people, there's unfortunately no line. It's very, very limited what immigration options people have. Um, the most common viable way for someone to get status is by marrying a US citizen. So that's why you hear that a lot. And then another option that is common is someone who has a US citizen child who turns 21 can be able to petition for their parents to get status. Um, and that's why I think they're going after birthright citizenship. Yeah. In addition to trying to limit the people who have citizenship. Yeah. So, besides those general examples, some people can get a work permit if they're applying for asylum. You are supposed to get a work permit while your asylum case is pending. Um, but it's temporary, right? They could lose their case, especially under these conditions where they're making it very hard to win your case. Um, but that's a way for people to get a work permit temporarily. TPS is a way, but again, they ended TPS for a lot of countries. Um, and let's see, there's something called like a U visa or a T visa. So U visa is for someone who's a victim of a crime, and reports it to like state or local police and can prove that get them to sign something saying they reported it. Or T visas for trafficking. Those folks can eventually get work permits. So it's really limited options, to be honest, but for some people possible. There are then also like employment related visas, but those have become very limited over decades. And so it's usually like someone who's like an engineer from India would be the one that would get that type of tech related visa. And not even those now, Trump has made a new thing. Those are called H-1B visas, where now the employer sponsoring someone has to pay $100,000 a person to apply for one of those. It's like crazy. It's just at all angles. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. So,
Mhm.
sorry, just real quick follow-up question. Is the purpose of getting an ITIN then just to file taxes?
Basically, yeah. And for the government's perspective, yes, because the IRS doesn't care if what status someone has. They just want money. So that's why there's millions and millions of undocumented immigrants who've been paying taxes for decades, right? And the government has always been very happy to receive those until their very stupid action to try to get info from the IRS, hence all those lawsuits on that. But there are also, it's not just undocumented immigrants, there's also various other types of people who have ITINs for other reasons. For example, like a business owner in another country who has income in the US would need an ITIN to file tax returns on that. So when someone has an I-10 and they're living in the US, most of the time they're undocumented, but not necessarily. Okay, I see a question. If someone's I-10 was expired, but they've reapplied, paid the fees, and are waiting for it to be processed, what's the reality of those applications? I actually don't know if those are being processed. Has anyone heard anything on that? I haven't heard anything bad on that, but I just don't know right now. It's a good question. I can ask my accountant friend. But generally, from the IRS's perspective, they want people to have ITINs so they can pay taxes because that's the government's source of revenue. I'm glad to hear it felt kind and digestible. It is difficult to deliver this awful information. So props to you all for taking the time to listen to all this. I'm curious, are you all getting questions from immigrant members about any of this stuff? Like, what are you all seeing on the ground?
I'd like to share really quickly. I'll be honest and say that a lot of folks in our community, I live in Portland, are getting ready to leave, and getting their accounts ready. Like, what is it that they need to open an account in another country? How they can get that support there, and honestly, obviously, a lot of fear. You see the things on Facebook, on social medias, all the false narratives that are happening, and that's the worst, is just feeling threatened and scared when it's like it's already happening, but like at another level of it's just it's just like seeping into all of these what we think are safer places and spaces. And so we just hope that the messaging that we're sharing with our members in our community is like, come to us, talk to us, don't believe anything you read, always go to a good source. And if it sounds too good to be true, it is. Like, don't ever think that you're going to win the lottery. Um, yeah. But again,
Yeah.
thank you, Adina, for all your information. It's been really helpful.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really sad to hear. A lot of people are wanting to leave, but I understand too, and I don't blame them. Yeah. I am also getting a lot of questions about what happens to my money if I'm deported. So I'll share what I share with people. In terms of like bank accounts, investment accounts, all of those people should be able to access from abroad, right? So like the investment account, as long as I always say, as long as you have Wi-Fi, you should be able to log in and like if you need the money, connect your local bank and like withdraw it, right? Or do a bank transfer or something, wire transfer. And potentially could also potentially leave the money for it to continue growing. Because one thing with investing that I actually would love for folks to get the word out about is you cannot open a US investment account from abroad, generally. And we'll see what happens. But for like decades, right, the US stock market has performed way higher than any other country in the world. And so, for folks who are worried about having to leave or thinking about leaving, like one thing you can do for your financial empowerment is like get the investment account open now while you're here. And then if you have to leave, you have to leave, but at least it's opened. Because they do need a US address to do that. And they have to be considered a resident for tax purposes, which is different than being a resident for immigration purposes. It's about like, do they live here, basically? Have they lived here for several years? Anyone else want to share something? Okay, well, I think we're ending right on time. Thanks everyone for being here again. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I'd love to connect with you all on LinkedIn. Let me actually just get my profile real quick for the link and hear about what you're seeing, ways we can support. And then in immigrant finance, we do have a lot of like free resources. Our YouTube channel is really helpful if folks just want to like educate themselves about their financial options. It's just immigrant finance on YouTube. So thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you, Adina. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great day. And this recording will be made available in all of our socials as well as YouTube. Honestly, guys, probably after the conference when we come back, since we'll be leaving at the end of this week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.